All right. Yep, I can see you.
Can you see me?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, everybody. You see the chat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Everybody, can you hear us? How long have you been staring at us? We're working out the kinks. This is our first live Q&A of hopefully many. Let us know in the chat if you can hear us okay and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Thumbs up in chat.
Perfectly.
Cool. All right. Yeah, so the equipment we're using today we might or might not use in the future. So I'm Joe Segrist. I'm president of the Purple Martin Conservation Association. With me for today's Q&A is Mercedes Liofsky, and she is our research manager here. Thank you everybody for sending in questions ahead of time. We've got a bunch. We're going to do some answers from the pre-submitted questions. We'll do some live questions from the chat, and I figure we will go and do nest checks since today's topic is housing and nest checks. We're going to try and somewhat keep things on topic. I know everybody has lots and lots of questions, but we figured we would try to have a topic, at least for the first one here, and see how it goes. So some of these questions I'll defer to Mercedes. I should have probably warned you about that. Yeah, and we've got Lydia, our marketing genius behind the camera here. And you'll probably see her at some point. Here. So, all right, how many people we got in chat? Thousands of people watching at home?
Millions and millions.
All right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because this will be recorded. So, yeah, I guess we'll just start. Actually, we're here today at one of our lovely research colonies. Can you see it behind us?
Mm-hmm.
Over there. Tell me when I'm...
Yep. Oh, where you're pointing? Okay, to the right more. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. More. Uh-huh. Up a little. Right. Close enough.
There, that's our one of our research Purple Martin colonies. This one here is, we call it our Rotary colony because that's the Rotary Pavilion back there, but this is the Waterworks Pond area at Presque Isle State Park, where the majority of our research colonies are, thanks to the state of PA for partnering with us and allowing us to conduct our research on their grounds. But if you hear a lot of kids screaming and whooping and hollering, there's the fishing program going over there. There's some kids having a picnic over there, playing soccer. I think there's some sort of a business retreat that's going to be happening shortly as well. They'll probably be less loud than the kids, but hopefully the audio is good. So we were going to go ahead and start with some of these recorded questions or pre-submitted questions, and this one is from Darren. Thank you, Darren. Darren's one of the people who went with us on our PMCA Purple Martin Eco Tour to Brazil this last winter that we are hoping to offer again in the future. But hi, Darren, if you're listening or watching. Darren asks, what's the PMCA's recommended nest check frequency? Mercedes is actually the person who enters all of your Project Martin Watch data and tries to decipher handwriting and make sense of it all. Mercedes, tell us, what's the recommended nest check frequency? What are our guidelines there with that?
Our guidelines are to check at least weekly. So we usually recommend every 5 to 7 days to check on your martin colony and record what's happening in your nests.
Yeah, so anything that has a bigger gap than 1 week, and that creates problem for our data set. So that typically you'll get a note from Mercedes with a little highlighted area that says we need these to be weekly, and that's that requirement is so that we can have a confidence in the final nest check around fledging, because if you don't check at the end there for like a month as the young are getting older, and you just show up and you don't give us an information on the nest being empty at the end in a timely fashion, you just like have 5 eggs and then or 5 babies and then a month later say it's empty, we don't necessarily know that it's birds that are fledged or birds that were eaten by a predator or something. So it's just there are these kind of rules that the data set has been set up with that we have to continue for consistency of data. Should you increase, decrease, or keep the same frequency of nest checks as the nesting cycle progresses, Mercedes?
You can keep the same frequency of checks around weekly. Sometimes if it's around hatching time and you want to check more frequently, so just for your own record, maybe you want to see like how old your nestlings are more precisely, you can check more frequently around hatching time. But you should keep to that, 5 to 7 day check through the whole season so we can get the most accurate data possible.
Yeah, it's nice when you have an exact date for the hatch, because then you can have better estimates of fledge time. And where some people struggle with conducting regular nest checks is around fledge time, because they worry about jumpers. And we have some older nestlings here that are of the age that they could potentially leave the nest early. So we're going to demonstrate during our nest check how to use the plug and string method so you can continue with your nest checks all the way through the nest cycle. All right. Oh, Darren, one last thing. He asked, are there any studies that correlate nest checks to mortality rate? That could be read two different ways. I guess the question would be, do nest checks increase mortality rate by like stressing the birds or causing problems? Or do nest checks improve their survival rate or decrease the mortality rate? And that is actually what the PMCA found, is that conducting regular nest checks leads to the outcome of more young fledged per nest, because you're able to catch things when they start to go wrong with your nest. You're able to find where that jumper belongs that you find on the ground, because you know how many young are supposed to be in nest 3 or whatever. So it's actually correlates with higher number of birds fledged per nest. Larry has a very unique colony, it sounds like here. He says his martin houses are set at 5 feet above ground level. He's got snake prevention buckets on the poles, and they're doing great. So why is it recommended you put martin houses higher off the ground? That's a great question, and I would love to see pictures of Larry's colony that's only 5 feet off the ground. Purple martins are somewhat adaptable to different conditions, and I think there's a combination of things that has kind of led to the current recommendation of how high purple martin housing should be. I think some of it is convenience. You can walk under it without hitting your head. You can run the lawnmower under it. And I think there's a certain amount of wanting to keep it out of the range of jumping cats or predators that might jump up, but not too high, because then it's more expensive more expensive poles, more prone to bending in the wind and all that sort of thing. So I think it's a combination of convenience factors there, and just over time landlords finding out what works best. So I'm sure in the past that people have experimented with different heights, and I don't have that data with us at the moment, but I think it's a combination of convenience and probably experience on what works best. All right, this is a question from David. Why does it take some landlords such a long time to attract purple martins to new colony sites? This is a group that sounds like their family moved from Alabama, where they had a colony, to Tennessee 5 years ago, and they've been trying, and they've had interested birds that have gone in and out of the house and given them interest, but have not stayed to reproduce. This is the million-dollar question that I wish we had an exact answer to. I think, it's certainly a combination of things, right? It has to do with the density of purple martins in a certain area. So you may be in an area where there are not a lot of colonies around, and you're reliant at a new location to have a purple martin wander across your site and decided that it's a great place. On the other hand, if there is a thriving colony nearby with lots of open cavities that are available, purple martins are colonial. They want to nest around other purple martins. Cool guy over here. They want to nest around other ones, so they may be irresistibly pulled towards this existing colony that's larger, successful, noisier. You know, as long as you have your purple martin colony kind of located properly by our recommendations, you know, with the right characteristics of housing, you make sure the sparrows don't move in, you make sure that you have starling resistant entrances on it, you're keeping predators at bay with predator protection, then you've got, you know, you're doing a lot of the things that you need to do. Sometimes it just takes time, and as you go farther north in the range, there are fewer purple martins, and that contributes to how much longer it takes as well. You know, I don't know, what's the longest that you've had somebody that's told you they've finally gotten purple martins after a long wait?
Sometimes people, it's like 20 years.
Yeah. It's usually not that long. Some people are so dedicated, they stick with it for so long. But I think that, you know, that makes it that much more rewarding when they finally get them, that much more valuable to them. And, you know, if you're in an area that it takes, you know, purple martins are so thin that it takes that long to attract them, then it's probably something that needs to be there. You need to have the colony in that area where there might not be a lot of purple martins, and your colony can eventually become the seed for other ones in that area to expand the range. So stick with it. Can't tell you exactly why they haven't come to your place yet, but that's kind of our thoughts on that. All right. Debbie asks, she is talking about, she has 2 8-gourd gourd racks, and she's got one that the birds are nesting in, and the other one the birds are going in and out, and sometimes creating nests, but not, she doesn't really have them nesting there. Mercedes, what would your thoughts be on that type of a situation? Because we have sometimes nests here that don't end up with eggs in it, right?
Right. There could just be that subtle difference in the location of the two. Maybe one just has slightly more open flyway or is more open away from trees, and for whatever reason they feel safer at that colony. Sometimes if you've added a new addition to your colony later in the season, the birds seem to still like that original one the best because that's what they're used to and have nested successfully in before. Yeah, sometimes it can be difficult to say. You can have very similar colonies next to each other and they prefer one over the other, but there can just be little subtle differences that for whatever reason they just have a preference.
Yeah, I think just like with the last answer, you know, I think if you had 2 poles kind of equally situated, but, you know, say 20-50 feet apart, and you had 4 nests in one and no nests in the other, a new bird is going to arrive and it's going to want to go to that pole that has more nests. So I think there's that kind of attraction of where the other birds are. So I think it's just a matter of time probably until you have them move in to both. It's just your colony needs to get to the point where there are that many birds to where it's overflowing from one into the other, rather than having them equally establish and grow in each pole. Kind of a similar offshoot question here from Joel. He asked, what's the possible reason for a loss of an entire prior documented nest in the compartment? So, you know, it's full of eggs and then the next check it's empty, or that situation potentially with chicks. When we have that here, what do you think it is, Mercedes?
Well, depending on your predator guard situation, the first thing I think about is predation. So you want to make sure you have a predator guard on your pole to prevent raccoons and snakes and land animals from climbing up your pole, because they can decimate a colony overnight, as well as hawk and owl guards around the entrances to prevent those predatory birds from being able to reach in and clean out a colony. Sometimes there are other birds small enough to fit through those, like the house sparrows and the starlings. They are nest competitors with the martins, so they will destroy purple martin nests to try to nest in that space. And if all of those seem like they don't check out, sometimes it can even be competing purple martin males themselves that will destroy a nest in hopes to have a brood with that female after destroying the original nest. So there's a few scenarios that can be going on, and depending on what you've witnessed and what type of predator guards you have on, you can kind of figure out one way or the other what might be happening.
Yeah, it could be a lot of different things, and I think it depends, all the characteristics of your colony, the age of the young. If they disappear as eggs, it's probably not a hawk or an owl, but it could potentially be a snake or a raccoon reaching in if the nest compartment is small enough, or competing birds. If it's young, then it really could be just about anything, although it's probably rarer for competing birds, sparrows, starlings, or even subadults to pull out every single nestling from a nest. You might have some go missing, but it's difficult to say. A lot of times it's snakes, when these kind of nests completely disappear, and properly mounted pole guard is critical. We recommend that for everybody. It doesn't matter if you mow your yard, doesn't matter if you have dogs, doesn't matter if you pour this or that chemical at the base of the pole. You have to have a predator guard on there. It's like insurance on your car. You don't know you need it until you needed it yesterday. And for people in areas where there are large snakes, adding snake netting at the top of the predator guard is an option, but at the very least you need to have a pole mounted predator guard mounted with the top at least 4 feet in height, as high as you can get away with it and still maintain access to your purple martin housing is what we recommend. On the topic of nest checks, Mary Jane says they've never done nest checks. You're not alone. She says, it seems terribly invasive to handle the chicks. Do you think it's necessary? So I can read this 2 ways. Just to do a nest check, you don't have to handle the chicks, right? You're just looking in, peeking in the door. How many we got? 5 eggs, 5 babies, 4 eggs, 1 baby. You're just counting. You're taking a peek and counting is truly what a nest check is. So no handling necessary. And the purple martins very quickly will adapt to you taking 15 minutes to lower the house down and take a look at it. They're used to us. They're very adaptable to being around humans, obviously. But handling the nestlings is something that would be necessary if you're doing a nest replacement, right? What would somebody use a nest replacement for, Mercedes?
So a nest replacement is recommended if you notice you have an overload of parasites in the nest. These can be mites, fleas, some areas have blowflies. So these parasites feed on the blood of the nestlings, and especially when they're smallest, that can really have a negative effect on their health. And so to do a nest change that does involve handling the nestlings, where you would have a bucket or a box and you take the nestlings out, put them in the bucket, and completely dump and clean out the nesting space and replace the nesting material with, we recommend clean, dry pine straw because it doesn't stay moist, it doesn't grow mold. And then you put those nestlings right back in, always back to the same compartment you took them from, doing a nest change, 1 nest at a time to avoid any type of mix-up. But It's not something that you have to do with your purple martin colony. You don't need to be that involved, but it's important to check in, and if you have an issue, we do recommend the nest change.
Yeah, it can help in instances where you have a lot of nest parasites. There's a certain amount of that that's natural. There's a certain amount of that no matter what you do with the nest, they live on the birds themselves. And one other instance that a nest check might be useful for is if your nest really gets wet. Say you have really driving rains, it gets really messy and muddy in there, potentially a buildup of microorganisms. That can actually lead to the breakdown of the nestlings' flight feathers, or just become caked on them, to where they're not going to be able to fledge successfully. So that's another instance beyond just the parasite side of things where a nest check might be useful. And as I mentioned early in the Q&A, that there are PMCA research has shown that doing nest checks has a direct positive outcome on the number of fledged per nest, because you can spot these instances. Here's Earl. He says, sounds like he put up some martin housing this year and had no luck. You're not alone. He says, when should I take him down? And was I too late this year? I don't know, because, well, you said May for Michigan. That's not necessarily too late. That's probably about the right time to put up new housing. If you didn't get birds, it's useful to leave the housing up until martins have migrated back south from your area. So even though that means fighting off sparrows for another month in the season or so, after the martins fledge from nearby colonies, the adults and the young kind of roam around a little bit, and at that point they're kind of making a mental image of where potential colony sites are for the following year. They're doing that internal mapping. So it's nice to have your housing available, still installed at that point, to where they can record that as a potential spot to go check out the following year. All right. Max says, he's talking about how purple martins lay 1 egg a day. And he's asking, how do you know which egg was the first to hatch, since they're laid 1 day apart? Do they hatch 1 day apart? Same question for fledging. Mercedes, how do you know which egg hatches first?
Well, you don't really know.
You don't.
Because all the eggs are just white and identical, so you don't know if that first egg is the one that hatches first. But they don't all hatch really on different days from each other, because incubation kind of starts for the whole nest around the same time. So the female bird will start incubating when the second to last egg is laid. So if you have a final clutch of 5 eggs, she's going to start incubating the day she lays the 4th egg. So they all kind of incubate around the same time and tend to hatch between 20 and 48 hours of each other.
Yeah, so like she said, you don't necessarily know which ones hatch first. The eggs don't actually develop until they're at incubation temperature, and if incubation doesn't begin with the first egg, that one doesn't really develop faster than the other ones. You could probably assume that the earlier laid ones are the earlier ones to hatch, but to tell you the truth, it doesn't necessarily matter that much. And likewise for fledging. Fledging is probably even less correlated with the time of hatching, just because there's so many other variables on how much food's being presented to the birds, which ones outcompete other ones for the food, that sibling competition side of things. Another question from them: what's their behavior of the fledging birds when they first leave the nest? Can they fly, or do they spend time on the ground? They say they have dogs. Dogs and cats are a big problem with birds who maybe fledge too early or don't get enough height off the ground. What do they do once they fledge, Mercedes?
They do fly, so they need to be at least 26 days old is typically the youngest they are when they can fly, and their feathers and everything are fully developed. So they typically really don't go to the ground. They fly, they might land in a nearby tree or a power line or something nearby, but you typically see the fledglings on the ground if they might have jumped out of the nest a little early, and then they have, you know, they're not fully developed to be able to fly. And sometimes the best thing to do in those scenarios is to put them back in the nest. You know, check your records if you have them. If not, you can put them back in a nest with a similarly aged nestlings. But yeah, they can fly, and anything on the ground usually means they can't fly and should be put back in the nest.
Yeah, it's you definitely want to keep your pets away during fledging time. Outdoor cats is a whole other topic for another day, but yeah, they should be able to fly when they truly fledge, and they should stay up off the ground. If they end up on the ground, try to figure out where they belong and put them back in there. All right, here's a question from Adrian. Adrian asked, how should I transition my current S&K telescopic triangular pull-sized house for a trendsetter or other new modern type? Wants to upgrade the housing to attract more martins next year. So I think it's tough to say exactly what's being asked there, but my understanding of that, or my interpretation of that, is that they're looking to retire their old purple martin house and go to a trendsetter or something that's on like a winch and cable. And what we recommend for those situations, if you can have a year of transition between the two, you can leave up your current housing that they're used to, install your new one right next to it, maybe block some of the entrances in your old housing so that if martins show up and they're kind of still preferring the old one, but you want for other reasons for them to be in the new one because you know that it has superior features or whatever, you know, you can kind of have a year of half and half for them to get used to the new one, and then the following year you can pull the old one out. All right, Polly's asking, 6 adults are flying around not landing in and on the house. They thought there might be a predator, which is a reasonable thought that there might be a snake or something in the house, because that is how they act. But after lowering the house, there were 3 eggs out on the landing, 1 broken, and the other 2 cool and very fragile. Any thoughts? Mercedes, what do you think happened?
Again, I would go back to wondering what type of predator guards you have, but I guess if there was a predator, they probably would have eaten those eggs unless they got interrupted and fled. But typically that sounds to me like maybe a unpaired male purple martin that's trying to destroy a nest, because they will like shove the eggs out. So that would kind of be my first thought, and unfortunately there's not really much you can do to prevent that other than checking frequently, because sometimes those eggs are not destroyed, they're just shuffled around, and you can put them kind of backward together. Sometimes you can have like a nest of 5 eggs and maybe 1 or 2 get rolled away out of the clutch, so they might not get incubated properly. So if there's enough time in between your checks, you might be able to move those back with the rest of the group and hopefully prevent them from not hatching.
Yeah, sounds like you had a troublemaker at the colony.
Yeah.
And that happens. You know, like she said, put the eggs back in the pile and hope for the best. If they're not broken, sometimes you can have subadults that build really crappy nests, and the eggs will roll all over anyway. So sometimes you're wrangling those nests for the birds anyway. But yeah, that sounds like a subadult thing. Calvin asked, is there a reason 90-degree elbow fittings are recommended for ventilating gourds like the excluder, super gourd, Troyers, rather than a male adapter fitting? He sent a picture, or included a picture with that post. So I'll show you guys when we lower the housing down, but we install a little vent on the back of the gourds to allow some kind of cross ventilation, so it's not a dead end for hot and humid air. And he's asking, wouldn't it be better if you just use a straight piece of PVC that's tilted down to keep the rain from coming in, rather than one that the wind has to make a 90-degree turn? And I think that probably would be better. I think, I tell you the truth, I don't know why exactly the 90-degree ones are being used over the others, rather than just, I think it's easier to thread something in straight than to drill a thin material at an angle and then thread something at an angle through the thin material. That's kind of, I think, why it started with the 90 degrees, and folks are just used to using that. But yeah, there's probably a slightly better ventilation if the air doesn't have to turn a corner. The last one from my printed sheet here is from Michelle. She said 2 years ago was the last time we had martins in our birdhouses. How can we get them to come back to their houses? Mercedes, when somebody has martins and then they don't have martins, what are some of the reasons that might be the case that they might want to resolve, and then how do they get those martins back once they've taken care of that?
So sometimes you kind of have to look at where you have your colony. Is there an issue where some trees have grown bigger and encroached and the martins don't feel safe anymore? Do you have your housing in the most open area possible on your property? Again, going back to predators, if purple martins don't nest successfully, if they have issues where a predator, destroys their nests, then they don't feel safe there. It's not a safe place for them to nest again the following year, so they will find a new place to nest the following year. Those are the two big ones, is do you have the right space where they feel safe, and then again, has there been a predator issue where they don't feel safe to come back?
Yeah, you want to assess, first thing is why they're gone in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like you said, the change in your local habitat over time is something that gets overlooked. We get a lot of calls from people like, I had martins for 20 years and they slowly got fewer and fewer, and now I don't have any anymore. And that could be for a lot of reasons, of course. We can't say exactly, but a lot of times the trees are just bigger than they used to be, and the location is less ideal over time. And absolutely make sure you've got predator guards on the pole. You got owl and hawk guards if you think that was an issue. Starling resistant entrance is going to eliminate your starling problem. Make sure you keep up with keeping sparrows at. And then once you have a season without purple martins, you're kind of back to square one. Those birds, if they were going to come back to your colony to breed, they would have in that particular season when you didn't have them. So you're back to trying to attract new martins, just like any new landlord. Playing the dawn song, pre-nesting, using decoys. I mean, there's a whole list of other things that people can do if you want to just keep going. Rubbing mud on the housing. Some people have used mirrors to make it look like there's other martins in the gourd when they look in. But really, you're back to square one, and you're just trying to attract new martins. That is it for my printed ones. Lydia, have you been kind of watching the chat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can walk and talk here, I think, and we'll do a nest check. Well, how are we doing on time? How long has it been?
It's 11:35.
Okay, perfect. We'll do a nest check on one of our poles here. It seems like it's quieted down a little bit, so that's great, and we will walk and talk.
All right.
Here,
I'm not a professional cameraman.
Let me carry it, since you're going to be looking at your chat here. And
so one of the first questions we got earlier, actually, right before we started, was about replacing nest materials. Cedar chips. Do you recommend those? What are the materials you recommend people use?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit. The question is, do we recommend cedar chips? So wood chips and wood shavings can be used successfully, but there is a potential issue in that they're a little more absorbent and swell up and kind of can cake down and mat down when you have water get in there. So in that regard, it's probably not ideal, but if that's what you've got and you keep an eye like Mercedes said, we recommend dry pine needles. All right, hopefully we didn't lose you guys. That's it for this gourd rack. Okay. So we've got these corks, the foam plugs and the strings to keep the ones that are ready to fledge or very close to fledging from jumping out too early before they're quite ready. So we put those plugs in there, keep them in as we're jostling the house and raising it. And then we'll give them a few minutes to calm down, and then we'll pull the strings to remove the plugs. Call that the plug and string method, and that's how you continue to do nest checks after you get nestlings that are ready to fledge, because the timing on all these birds is not the same. So like you saw, we had ones that just hatched, and then we've had ones that have already fledged. Oh, that one just took it.
That one stole our plug. What? Let it go.
That was interesting.
That's one way to catch a bird. Let go of it.
Alright, so we'll give it a minute here for these guys to calm down. Okay. Here, listen, we should do like a special sign off. And we'll see you next time. You want to do that?
Sure. Just spread it out. We'll do it.
Yeah. All right, guys. I'm Jim,
And I'm Mercedes.
and we'll see you next time. Bye. Tara, you can stream from the... Nailed it.
Nailed it. Can we stop this here?
Yeah.